The arena was already trembling long before the music began. It was the summer of 1969, and Las Vegas looked less like a city and more like a galaxy that had fallen onto the desert. Every casino glowed with impossible colors. Neon lights painted the sidewalks in crimson, gold, and electric blue. Long black Cadillacs lined the streets, while thousands upon thousands of fans flooded toward the International Hotel, hoping to witness the man whose voice had become the heartbeat of a generation. Inside the arena, every seat was filled, every aisle overflowed. People stood shoulder to shoulder, dressed in elegant suits, sparkling evening gowns, cowboy hats, leather jackets, and military uniforms. Some had traveled across the country. Others had crossed oceans. No one wanted to miss this night. Because whenever Elvis Presley walked onto a stage, people believed they weren't simply attending a concert. They believed they were witnessing history. Behind the enormous velvet curtain, however, history looked strangely human. Elvis stood completely alone. The roar of more than 10,000 voices echoed through the walls like distant thunder, but he barely heard them. His dressing room door remained half open. A single bulb above the mirror flickered softly. His famous white jumpsuit shimmered beneath the warm lights, every crystal reflecting tiny fragments of gold. His guitar rested quietly against a chair. Beside it sat a half-finished cup of black coffee that had already gone cold. He wasn't looking at his reflection. He was staring at something much smaller. A faded leather wallet. Its edges had become cracked with age. Very carefully, almost like someone touching an old wound, he opened it. Hidden inside was a tiny, folded piece of paper. The paper had yellowed over the years. The ink had nearly disappeared. No one, not his manager, not his musicians, not even his closest friends, had ever seen it. It was a memory he carried instead of a photograph. He unfolded it. Only one sentence remained readable. "I'll find you again." Elvis closed his eyes. His breathing slowed. For just a moment, the screaming crowd disappeared. The lights disappeared. Las Vegas disappeared. And somewhere deep inside his heart, the rain returned. 20 years earlier, the road stretched endlessly beneath a black sky. The old pickup truck rattled over broken pavement as young Elvis drove through a storm that seemed determined to wash the entire world away. Back then, no one recognized his face. No one chased him for autographs. No one screamed his name. He was simply another young man chasing impossible dreams with almost no money in his pocket and music filling every corner of his soul. His windshield wipers struggled against the relentless rain. Lightning split the heavens. The radio faded in and out through static. Then he saw them. A woman and a little girl standing alone beside the road. The woman could barely remain on her feet. The child clung tightly to her soaked coat. Cars rushed past without slowing. Headlights flashed, then vanished into darkness, one after another. Nobody stopped. Elvis tightened his grip on the steering wheel. He looked ahead. He looked back through the rearview mirror. His truck rolled another few yards, then he slammed on the brakes. The tires screamed across the wet pavement. He reversed through the rain until the truck stopped beside them. He rolled down the window. "Ma'am?" The woman didn't answer. She simply collapsed. The little girl cried out, "Please." Her tiny voice nearly disappeared beneath the storm. My mama won't wake up." Without thinking, Elvis jumped from the truck. Within seconds, his clothes were completely soaked. He knelt beside the woman. Her skin was burning with fever. She struggled to breathe. Every breath sounded weaker than the one before. "We need a hospital," Elvis whispered. The little girl looked at him with frightened eyes. "We don't have money." Elvis reached into his pocket. He counted every dollar he owned. It wasn't much. It was everything. Money he needed for gasoline, food, rent, maybe even his next chance to chase his dream. He stared at those crumpled bills for only a heartbeat. Then he folded them back into his fist. Not because he intended to keep them, because he already knew they no longer belonged to him. "Come on," he said gently. "We're getting you there." A sharp knock on the dressing room door pulled Elvis back into the present. "5 minutes, Elvis," Colonel Parker's familiar voice came through the hallway. "They're going crazy out there." No answer. Another pause. "You ready?" Elvis slowly folded the paper again. "As ready as I'll ever be." The door closed. Silence returned. He slipped the paper into his wallet exactly where it had lived for 2 decades. Then he looked into the mirror. Millions of people saw confidence whenever they looked at Elvis Presley. The mirror saw something different. It saw a man carrying one unanswered promise. One face he had never forgotten. One night that refused to fade. He whispered to himself, "I hope you're alive." No cameras heard those words. No reporters wrote them down. The world would never know. Outside, the orchestra began tuning. Trumpets rose. Violins breathed. The drummer tested the snare. Bass strings vibrated through the enormous hall. The audience erupted. "Elvis! Elvis! Elvis!" The chant grew louder and louder, until it became something almost primal, a heartbeat shared by thousands of strangers. Backstage, every crew member rushed into position. Spotlight operators adjusted their beams. Sound engineers checked the microphones one final time. Security guards formed their lines along the stage. Everything had been rehearsed to perfection. Every second, every light, every entrance. Because an Elvis Presley concert was more than entertainment. It was precision. It was spectacle. It was magic. The stage manager lifted one finger. 1 minute. The musicians took their places. The conductor inhaled deeply. The massive curtain trembled. Elvis stepped into the shadows behind it. He could feel the heat from the lights before they even turned toward him. His heartbeat remained strangely calm, almost too calm, as though some invisible force had already decided tonight would not belong to music. The countdown began. 10, the crowd screamed. 9, more voices joined. 8, camera flashes exploded like stars. 7, the orchestra tightened their grip. 6, the curtain cables strained. 5, Elvis quietly touched the wallet in his pocket. Just once, almost unconsciously. 4, a strange feeling crossed his chest. Not fear, not excitement, recognition. As if somewhere beyond the curtain, someone had been waiting for him for far longer than he realized. 3. The lights went completely dark. The audience held its breath. 2. The conductor lifted his baton. 1. The curtain began to rise. And in the exact instant, Elvis Presley took his very first step toward the waiting microphone. A tiny figure slipped beneath the security barrier. No one noticed at first. Not the musicians, not the photographers, not even Elvis. A little girl, wearing a brightly colored scarf, sprinted across the front of the stage with astonishing determination, weaving between startled security guards before anyone could react. One guard lunged, another shouted, "Stop her!" But she never slowed. Her eyes never left Elvis. And for reasons no one could possibly understand, the closer she came, the more the smile slowly disappeared from Elvis's face. For one endless heartbeat, the entire arena seemed to stop breathing. The orchestra never struck the opening note. The spotlights froze where they were. The security guards reached for the little girl, but Elvis slowly lifted one hand. No. His voice was calm. Let her come. The command echoed through the silence. No one argued. The little girl finally stood before him. She couldn't have been older than 7. Her colorful scarf had slipped slightly from her head after running across the stage. Tiny curls framed her face. Her shoes were dusty, as though she had traveled a long way. In one trembling hand she held an old brown envelope so worn that its corners had nearly fallen apart. She wasn't crying. She wasn't smiling. She simply looked into Elvis's eyes, as though she had known him all her life. The audience watched in complete confusion. Some thought it had been planned. Others believed it was simply an excited child who had escaped security. Television cameras zoomed closer. Reporters lowered their notebooks. Even Colonel Parker stood frozen backstage, whispering to himself, "What in the world is happening?" The little girl slowly stepped closer, close enough that only Elvis could hear her. She stood on her tiptoes. Then she leaned toward his ear and whispered only 6 words. "She never stopped waiting for you." Nothing more. Only 6 words, yet they struck harder than thunder. Elvis's eyes widened. The color drained from his face. His fingers loosened. The microphone slipped from his hand. It struck the stage with a sharp metallic crack that echoed across the arena. No one moved. No one spoke. For the first time anyone could remember, an Elvis Presley concert had become completely silent. The silence was almost frightening. Elvis stared at the child. His lips parted, but no sound came out. He looked at the envelope, then back into her eyes. "Who?" His voice barely existed. "Who told you those words?" The girl swallowed. "My grandmother." The world disappeared again. Not the lights, not the crowd. Only the years. His mind was suddenly carried backward through time, to a lonely country road swallowed by rain. The young mother had been unconscious for nearly the entire drive. The truck bounced across rough roads, while Elvis kept one hand tightly on the steering wheel and the other checking whether she was still breathing. The little girl sat beside her mother. She never cried. She simply held her mother's hand with both of hers. Every few minutes she whispered, "Please don't leave me." Elvis pressed harder on the accelerator. The truck wasn't built for speed. The engine groaned. Rain battered the windshield so heavily he could barely see more than a few feet ahead. Then, a distant cross appeared. The hospital. He had never been happier to see a building. He carried the woman inside himself. Doctors rushed toward them. Nurses asked questions. "Family?" "No." Husband? No. Can you pay the admission? Elvis reached into his pocket without hesitation. He emptied every dollar onto the reception desk. Bills, coins, everything. The nurse counted them. It's not enough. I know. We still need... It's all I have. The woman behind the desk looked at him for several long seconds. Then she looked toward the exhausted little girl. Finally, she quietly pushed the money back toward him. No. Elvis frowned. What? We'll take care of her. I can't let you. You already have. She smiled softly. You stopped. Those two simple words stayed with him forever. You stopped. Not everyone does. The doctors disappeared down the hallway with the woman on a stretcher. The little girl refused to let go of Elvis's hand. She looked impossibly small beneath the harsh hospital lights. Is Mama going to die? Elvis knelt before her. He wanted to promise everything would be all right, but he didn't know. Instead, he reached into his jacket. There was only one thing left, a small notebook. He tore out a page, borrowed a pen from the receptionist. Then he wrote slowly. My name is Elvis. One day I hope people know my songs, but if they never do, please remember tonight. And if life is kind to me, I'll find you again. He folded the paper carefully, placed it inside an envelope, wrote nothing on the outside, then handed it to the little girl. When your mama gets better, he smiled, give this to her. The child hugged the envelope as though it were treasure. I'll keep it forever. Elvis smiled. I believe you. Before leaving, he removed the small silver cross from around his neck. It wasn't expensive, it wasn't famous. It was simply the only thing his mother had ever given him that he carried every day. He placed it gently into the girl's tiny hand. For courage. The little girl looked up at him. When will I see you again? Elvis hesitated. He looked toward the rain pouring outside, then back at her. One day. Promise? He nodded. I promise. Back in the present, Elvis's knees felt weak. His breathing became uneven. The little girl standing before him looked almost exactly like the child he had left behind 20 years earlier. The same determined eyes, the same quiet courage, the same way of holding an envelope close to her heart. His voice shook. Your grandmother. The little girl nodded before he could finish. She told me your story every birthday. Elvis blinked. Every birthday? She said that if the world ever called you a king, I should remember that she first knew you as a stranger who stopped in the rain. Several musicians quietly lowered their instruments. One violinist discreetly wiped away tears. Even the seasoned security guards standing at the edge of the stage avoided looking directly at Elvis. The little girl carefully lifted the envelope. I promised Grandma I would only give this back to you. Her small hands trembled. So I came. Elvis accepted it with unbelievable care. It felt strangely heavy, much heavier than paper should. The envelope had been opened countless times before. Its edges were soft with age. Its surface carried faint water stains. Rain. Or tears. Perhaps both. His fingers hesitated over the seal. He suddenly realized something. "What is your grandmother's name?" The little girl lowered her eyes. For the first time, a tear rolled down her cheek. "My grandmother," her voice cracked, "can't come herself." Elvis's heart tightened. "Why?" The child looked toward the floor, then whispered words so quietly that even the nearest cameras failed to capture them. "She passed away 3 weeks ago." The words struck harder than any applause ever had. Elvis closed his eyes. The promise he had carried for 20 years had arrived 3 weeks too late. The arena remained silent, not because people had been told to be quiet, but because somewhere deep inside, every person present understood they were witnessing something far greater than a concert. Very slowly, with trembling hands, Elvis opened the old envelope. Inside, he immediately recognized his own handwriting. The ink had faded, the paper had yellowed, but every word was exactly as he remembered writing it on that storm-filled night. Beneath the letter lay another folded document, thicker, official, stamped by a hospital. Elvis unfolded it carefully. His eyes began moving across the page. Then they suddenly stopped. His hands started to shake, and without realizing it, the first tear fell onto the paper. The paper trembled between Elvis's fingers. At first, no one understood why. The audience could not see the words. The orchestra remained perfectly still. Thousands of people watched the giant screens above the stage, where Elvis's face now filled every corner of the arena. For years, the world had watched that face smile, laugh, sing, command a stage like no one else. But almost no one had ever seen it break. His eyes moved slowly across the faded hospital document. Every line seemed to pull another memory from somewhere deep inside his soul. The letter had been signed by the attending physician on duty that stormy night. It read, "To the young man who brought this patient to our hospital. You left before we could learn your full name. We later discovered that you paid every dollar you carried, so treatment could begin immediately. You should know that those few minutes changed everything. Had the patient arrived even a little later, she would not have survived the night. Because of your kindness, a daughter kept her mother. Because of your courage, an entire future remained possible. Whoever you are, thank you." Elvis stopped reading. He could not continue. The paper slowly slipped toward his chest, as though he wanted to hold it against his heart. His breathing became uneven. For 20 years, he had believed that night had simply been one small act of kindness, one stranger helping another, nothing more. He had never imagined that a handful of dollars, a single decision, one stop on a lonely road, had protected an entire family that had not even existed yet. He looked at the little girl standing beside him. She smiled through her tears.
My grandma always said that every birthday I celebrated belonged to you, too.
Those words shattered the last wall around Elvis's heart. He knelt in front of her, not as a superstar, not as the king of rock and roll, simply as a man. His eyes were level with hers now. What was she like? The little girl smiled softly.
She laughed a lot.
Elvis smiled through his tears. I remember.
She baked apple pie every Sunday.
I can believe that.
She sang your songs even when she forgot some of the words.
A gentle laugh escaped Elvis. The audience laughed with him, not because anything was funny, but because grief and love sometimes arrive together. The little girl reached into her small shoulder bag.
There is one more thing.
She carefully removed a tiny silver cross. Time had dulled its shine. The chain had been repaired more than once. Yet Elvis recognized it immediately. His hand slowly covered his mouth. My cross. The little girl nodded.
Grandma wore it every single day.
She placed it carefully into his palm.
She told me
that courage should always find its way back home. Elvis closed his fingers around the little cross. For a long moment, he could not speak. Then he stood. He turned slowly toward the audience. The sea of faces disappeared into darkness beneath the lights. Yet somehow, he felt closer to those strangers than ever before. He walked to the microphone lying on the stage, bent down, picked it up. The metallic echo from its fall still seemed to linger in the silence. He held it close. His voice came quietly. So many people think they know my greatest night. He looked around the arena. They'll tell you it was a sold-out show. They'll tell you it was the applause. They'll tell you it was the songs. He gently shook his head. They're wrong. Another silence settled across the arena. The greatest moment of my life happened long before anyone knew my name. It happened on a rainy night when I almost kept driving. Several people in the audience lowered their heads. I wasn't rich. I wasn't famous. I didn't have answers. I only had a choice. He looked at the little girl again. And tonight, God allowed me to discover what that choice truly meant. His eyes filled once more. I've stood before millions of people. I've heard crowds louder than thunder. I've received awards that most people only dream about. But none of them will ever mean as much as hearing this little girl tell me that her grandmother never stopped waiting. The arena remained silent. Not one person interrupted him. Not one camera flash exploded. Even the photographers had lowered their cameras. Some moments deserved witnesses, not photographs. Elvis slowly reached toward the conductor. I had a different opening plan tonight. He smiled faintly. But some plans belong to us.
And some belong to heaven.
He looked toward the orchestra. Would you play something very simple? The conductor nodded. No dramatic introduction, no dazzling arrangement. Only a quiet piano, a soft violin, a gentle acoustic guitar. The music floated through the arena like a whisper. Elvis took the little girl's hand. He did not ask her to leave the stage. Instead, he invited her to stand beside him. This song, he said softly, isn't for history.
It isn't for newspapers.
It isn't for television.
It's for one woman who believed that kindness should never be forgotten. Then he began to sing. His voice was different now, less polished, more fragile. Every lyric carried the weight of memory. Every note sounded less like a performance and more like a prayer. Many in the audience cried openly. Couples held each other. Parents embraced their children. Musicians quietly wiped tears from their faces while continuing to play. Even the security guards standing along the stage no longer tried to hide their emotions. When the final note faded, no one applauded. Not immediately. Silence returned once more. A beautiful silence. The kind that exists only when thousands of hearts are feeling exactly the same thing. The little girl squeezed Elvis's hand. "There was something Grandma wanted me to tell you." Elvis looked down. "What is it?" She smiled exactly as her grandmother had all those years ago. "You kept your promise." Elvis blinked. "I thought I had forgotten." The little girl gently shook her head. "No. People forget. But love remembers." Those words settled deep inside every soul in the arena. Elvis looked upward, beyond the lights, beyond the ceiling, as though somewhere above the desert sky, someone who had once stood in the rain was finally smiling.
He quietly placed the silver cross around his neck once again. It rested exactly where it had belonged 20 years before. Only now, it carried the story of 3 generations. When the house lights slowly brightened, thousands of people remained standing in complete silence. No one rushed toward the exits. No one spoke. Many simply held the hands of the people beside them. Newspapers the following morning would write about the interrupted concert. Television programs would call it unforgettable. Fans would remember that Elvis sang only one unexpected song. But those who had truly been there, those who had witnessed the tears, would tell a different story. They would tell their children that they once watched the most famous man in the world discover that the greatest legacy is not built by applause. It is built by compassion. Years later, people would forget the exact set list. They would forget the stage design. They would forget the dazzling lights that filled the arena that night. But they would never forget the image of a little girl in a colorful scarf placing an old envelope into trembling hands. Or the sight of Elvis Presley standing before thousands of strangers with tears on his face, finally understanding that the smallest act of kindness can echo across generations. Because legends are remembered for the songs they leave behind, but they become immortal for the lives they change without ever expecting anything in return. And somewhere, far beyond the applause, far beyond the headlines, a promise made on a rainy night had finally found its way home.